Welcome to Sacred Harmony, where soul meets strategy. Today, we are joined by Andrew Ronchetto, co-founder of BeOn, a bold platform reshaping how we experience well-being at work. Andrew doesn't just build tech, he builds trust. With deep reverence for our inner landscapes, he is on a mission to turn stress and fragmentation into harmony and performance, using technology not to disrupt, but to realign. So, Andrew, let's start with your why. What personal insight led you to create BeOn and focus on intersection of inner wellness and organizational culture?
No, absolutely. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me on the podcast and giving me the opportunity to talk about this because it is something that is so important to me, both at a personal level, but also just from my experiences as a leader within the organizations and the teams that I have been a part of. And I've found over the last couple of years not only a recognition that we all see in the data that, I'll say burnout and stress and all these factors that kind of define or redefine the way we look at work have been going in the wrong direction. But more importantly, that it's not being addressed by all these tools and this technology and this conversation that's been going on that really brings or continues to reiterate on traditional methods. And so for me, like my why is based in this whole idea of looking at these massive complex situations and figuring out how we can create pathways for success in them. And that means looking at this challenge in front of us and really thinking outside the box and challenging those traditional norms of the way we look at well-being and the way we look at work to fundamentally find a new path forward that will work not just for those that are in the workforce today, but help us position the workforce for tomorrow as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how did dishonest show up for you personally? And how did you realign?
Well, for me personally, it kind of showed up after a number of years of, I'm going to say, stress and whatnot materializing itself in like a physical disablement, so to say. I got some herniated disc in my back and it's permanent damage, unfortunately. And what I came to realize from that experience is a few things. One, even though we talk about it a lot, even though folks mean well, including leaders and managers, I don't think anybody just wholeheartedly goes into it and says, I don't recognize when something is wrong with my people. Sometimes I just don't know what to do about it. But even with all of those factors, I didn't recognize it. And that's a personal thing on me that I have learned over the course of the last few years to recognize where those limits are and start to change or adjust my approach because of that recognition of those limits. But the second part of this for me is twofold. And this is related to how we get help and how we are helped by those capabilities, our community, our workplace to actually do something about this in a fundamentally new way. And it doesn't just apply to our well being, it also applies to our ability to grow as individuals, to align the work to our purpose. But this thing that I'm talking about is fundamentally the enablement, whether it's through technology or processes or data, with the individual at the center. So, me or you or anybody listening to this podcast, and the support community rallying around them and having the tools and the assets, so on and so forth, to be able to support us in those ways that we need. And that doesn't really exist. I experienced that in my situation where I was working with multiple practitioners at the time, and not through faults of their own. They are in this world to help people. Yet, whether it was through the technology, most practitioners use 5 to 10 apps just to deliver their services to any given client. Whether it was through the technology or the lack of communication between each of them, what I ended up feeling like was a traffic cop. And when you feel like a traffic cop, you really don't put yourself in a position where you're truly recovering 100% of the time, but having to, I'll say, manage the situation before you can focus on yourself to recover. And that is what is flawed in this current approach and what we're trying to address is that recognizing that big, hairy problem that practitioners deal with when they engage with their clients and workplaces deal with when they engage with their employees or managers to employees or executives to managers, employees, whatever that relationship or that engagement looks like, all of it is challenged by the fact that whether it's an unavailability of data or technology or capabilities or understanding, it needs a change in the world. And there's something that we can do about that.
It's amazing how the toughest inner moments can often catalyze the most transformational missions.
Absolutely. That is the biggest part of this because it is one, recognizing those moments, and then two, doing something with those moments. And sometimes those moments can materialize in non substantial ways. Like, unfortunately, it hit me across the face, so to say. But in other ways, that moment could be when a leader, for example, listens to their employees and proactively does something as a result of that, a way of creating better engagement or a better feeling of understanding of where somebody is at. Those are moments as well. And it's sometimes unfortunate that we're so busy running through life for ourselves that when we're in those positions of power or those positions to potentially coach or lead or manage, whatever it might be for you, that we sometimes don't listen enough. And as a result of that, we don't take those moments to do something about it. And when we don't recognize those moments, not only is it one of those things like you talk about elders passing wisdom down, but when we don't recognize it because we've been through it before and we don't do something about it, then those that are, going to be on the receiving end of it don't know what to look for themselves. And as a result, it creates kind of this cascading effect of I'm not helping you look for it. They're therefore not looking for it themselves within themselves. And then as they grow in their careers or in their life, they might be not looking for it in those around them. So these moments, whether macro and life changing in some ways like mine, or micro in the examples I was giving, can fundamentally change what we're talking about.
Yeah, makes sense. So, most people think of tech as overwhelming or even distracting. How does Beyond flip that narrative? And how can technology actually heal disconnection?
That is a fantastic question. And the first thing I want to hit on related to that is we think about technology not as something that has to be a companion every day of your life. We actually talk about what we call digital detox moments. And you're probably like laughing a little bit at that, thinking like, wait a second, you're a technology company telling me to detox technology. Like, how does that work out for you, from a company perspective? And that is because what we're focused on is the macro activity. We don't need to know the day to day to help you succeed. What we do need to do with technology is help individuals begin to trust it again, and not just trust the technology, but also trust the people that have built the technology, the people that leverage that technology to support me as an individual. And this, without us going on a complete tangent, is yes, related to data privacy, but it is also related to the intentionality of what that technology is being used for. And why I bring that up is part of building that trust and that transparency and that ability to use it to redefine this relationship with technology in a new way has to come from the way we architect it from the beginning. And that architecture needs to be oriented towards the individual as the point of success that you're expecting. Not necessarily to say you disregard how you're going to make money, but if your intention is to make money off of the data you collect from the individuals, then you're probably not thinking about the technology in the way I'm talking about it here. So, reorienting the relationship to the technology is a critical factor in building that trust. And there are a lot of things companies can do today. And I'll leave it with one last thought here. And this isn't me being like anti blockchain, for example, or anti Web 3.0, however you want to look at it. Uh, we don't need to wait for new technology for us to create that ownership and accountability in the usage and availability of that data to the individual and to those that are within their circle. What we can do is do it today with the technology we have. What is more important is it being a business decision to make that change. And that is what we've done with BeOn to help begin the transition and I'll say maturity or evolution of our usage and our relationship with technology. And one last thing here before I stop, because this is an important one for me. Technology has evolved rapidly. I mean, I have grown up from the point of being able essentially to put a computer on your desktop at home to being able to see it in your hand, to having it on your wrist, to having it on a ring or in a ring in your finger. And a lot of this has happened in the last decade. We are living and breathing that technology change together and we're experiencing it at the same time and we're evolving it or revolutionizing it however you want to talk about it, even the use of AI and the implementation of that within the technology real time. So it's not that we have to give it all up. Privacy is no longer important, or um, the way we use technology is just the way it is. It really is, a moment in time right now that we can change that experience because it is changing so rapidly around us. And this is really just a blink of an eye if you think about it in the broader context of human history.
I love that. Technology as an ally in awareness, not just a tracker of productivity.
Absolutely. That is critical. The productivity is a byproduct. I think that's the thing we forget about is it is a byproduct and output of us producing value. But value doesn't necessarily come from being productive. And we kind of think about it as well, if I can get 10 things done, then I'm being, in that hour, and that's, 2x faster than I could do it before, then I must be more productive. But what we miss out in that equation is the factor of value. And what I'll say is more important in that is we miss out on the human element of what it means to drive productivity and value. Because when you think about the equation for performance, to, roll this back a little bit further, peel the onion, performance today is defined off some hard metrics: how much I did, how much I got, how much time it took. And the human element of that is not taken into account. And if we're here to focus on well being, which is something that employees crave today, that individuals in their lives crave today, to make a change, to not continue to go, with the current and the way we've been going through it, what we need to do to that specific equation related to productivity, but ultimately to performance, is embed a new variable into it and take it into account and be objective about it, which is the human factor. Because yes, I might have been able to do something 2x faster, but what did it cost me? Or what did it cost my team or my organization? Because I can't continue to just make something 2x faster every single time I do it. It's just not the way it works. At some point, there is a cost associated to it. Maybe I don't sleep as much, and maybe that doesn't impact that direct project or that direct activity, but it does impact something down the road. And we need to take that type of accountability into mind when we talk about these things and forget about the human element or variable in the equation.
Absolutely. So, you talk about realigning teams through empathy and inner harmony. In a result driven world, how do you convince companies that this is more than just a nice to have?
Well, I'm going to tell it to you straight up. This is a strategic imperative. And I can give you one very simple example to highlight how important it is to focus on your people. And think about that in the context of all the work a team has to do. When you lose an individual in that team, for whatever the reason is, that work doesn't go away. Normally, we all can agree with this. It just gets consumed by the rest of the individuals in that team. Well, there's a problem with that. When you do that, it's not like those individuals were sitting around twiddling their thumbs. I mean, keeping the scenario simple, we're going to expect that those individuals were already working nonstop themselves, 40 plus hours a week, I hate to say. And if we now got to add more to that because I lost somebody on the team, well, there are ramifications of that. Unfortunately, a lot of those ramifications are almost kind of underneath the cover. My people having to work later hours, well, if they're full time in a lot of places, that doesn't cost me anything more. So I don't even see it hitting my bottom line. But also, other ways it materializes potentially is in healthcare costs or premiums, because burnout and stress leads to a general increase in chronic related illnesses. And if you look at healthcare plans, a lot of the cost of those plans is directly associated to chronic diseases. So you can see a direct linear line between the work being done to the costs associated with that work, even if it's so to say, an undertone or a vibe underneath what the surface that we don't see, connected to the costs of the company, connected to the healthcare and the outcomes of the individual. And so my response is, if you want to be strategic about this or need to be strategic about this, then you need to put wellness at the forefront. And keeping with that example, what if the reason why the individual left is because they didn't feel alignment with it, their purpose with the company, that they didn't feel like they were being appreciated, that they didn't feel that the company was taking their well-being seriously because they were having them work odd hours or late hours without recognition, without acceptance, all of these factors that generally lead, like when people leave companies, we talked about this for ages. They don't leave a company because they are upset with the company, they leave the company because of the manager. So step back and come back to the beginning or the basis of this question and think about why it is strategic. If you are a manager and you are losing somebody on your team, it is most likely because of you. And as I said at the beginning of this, that is generally driven off of the fact that we don't listen enough and we don't take appropriate action to support our people. That's why this is strategic and not just some lofty, hefty, hopeful goal to, bolt on the end, so to say, do outside of my 9 to 5 work, because there is direct business associated impact. And we could argue all day long about, well, show it to me in the numbers. Well, it's hard. And I'm going to acknowledge that it is hard. If everybody else on the team consumes that capacity, the additional work, I don't see it because it's still getting done. Or if I go and it takes me 6 months to hire somebody new, I don't necessarily see that cost. I do a little bit, maybe if I'm using a recruiter, but all the time spent by individuals interviewing or reviewing or preparing, all of those costs, like we talk about the cost of recruiting, depending on the level, you could look at 100% plus of the cost of that total package for that individual in a year being the cost to replace somebody. Now, while it might be difficult to, you know, put a hard, solid line between those costs and the correlation of losing somebody, that is a business impact. And that is why this needs to be strategic.
Absolutely. So, What's the measurable impact of this kind of conscious culture?
I think the measurable impact of this kind of comes down into a couple of ways. We all talk a lot about culture these days. And I think one measurable impact of this is that feeling or understanding or relationship that employees have around their culture within the company. And we've seen the data lately. Culture is not doing well. And a lot of it we say is because of engagement, but you could say engagement hasn't been doing well for a while. The measurable items of a lot of this is really related to the whiplash I'm going to say employees feel from the decisions that are being made, and that is something you can measure, and it's simple to measure in the sense that I mean I can look at picking on technology companies that when COVID hit, granted, we all were experiencing it, I'll say in our lifetime for the first time. And, reason why say it that way is because we were all experiencing it for the first time. We made decisions based on the best available data we had at that point. Well, I think we're just going to be remote. We're never going to have anybody back in the office. And this isn't a return to office debate. What I bring it back to is the whiplash. Employees realigned their lives around that expectation of remote. And it took time to do that, and not just like I'm going to say a couple months type of thing. Like people moved, they sold houses, they worked outside of the country. I mean, there's so many factors that were involved in there to create a better life for themselves or their family, whatever the motivating factors were. And the whiplash is in the decisions that have come after the fact to say, oh, all that was for naught. We're just going to bring it back in, and this is just because we're struggling with XYZ. When you know that that is not the real reason why. Those are measurable things that we can take into account. The challenge with all of that is the things that I'm talking about that are measurable relate to trust and relate to vulnerability within leadership. And we don't like it when the light is shining on us because we're expected to know everything and to be strong and firm. And some leaders are owning up to it. I'm going to say most are just kind of letting it go. And it's those ones that are letting it go where we see the measurable impact because it's hurting them on the cultural side, the trust side, on the engagement side, on the performance side, on the all these other factors that are so critical to them because of this whiplash, like I said, employees are experiencing.
When we lead with heart, success becomes sustainable, not just scalable.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm going to talk about heart from the perspective of empathy. When we understand or we show emotional intelligence to the situation at hand, everything I've been talking about for the last, 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes has really been some no does. Oh, yeah. I mean, that makes sense. And yes, I'm actually talking about it because when we don't talk about it, we just kind of let it slide. But when we talk about it, it brings it into the dialogue. The empathy and emotional intelligence aspect of it is what do we as leaders do about it to create impact, trust, vulnerability, engagement, the things that I've been talking about, because that is where it's going to come from the heart. I'm not suggesting here that leaders or managers out there need to create 1,000, if you got 1,000 employees, you need to have 1,000 personal plans for how that those individuals are going to engage in the company. I'm not suggesting that. What I am suggesting is we can have some standards, but those standards can be highly customizable to individuals because the standards are driven off of what are the outputs we need to drive towards rather than what is the exact model employee I'm expecting. And because I'm changing that frame of reference, now it opens up the ability for us to introduce our heart, to introduce empathy, to leverage our listening skills and emotional intelligence muscles or flex those to fundamentally start making some of the changes we're talking about to move us forward.